Her hand froze mid-motion, suspended in disbelief as her phone screen illuminated with a name she hadn't seen in nearly a year. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that glowing rectangle on her kitchen counter. The half-prepared dinner forgotten as her pulse quickened and her throat went dry. The baby monitor beside her cast a soft blue glow, her daughter's gentle breathing a stark contrast to the sudden chaos erupting in her chest. Have you ever received a call that could shatter the life you've carefully rebuilt? That moment when the past you've tried to escape suddenly demands to be heard? For Vivian Monroe, that call came from the billionaire who had once controlled every aspect of her life. The man she'd fled from 11 months ago, carrying a secret that would change everything. What would make a woman who escaped a controlling relationship ever consider letting that man back into her life? And what happens when he discovers the daughter he never knew existed? Hello, my beautiful queens. Today's story touches something deep in every woman's heart. The courage it takes to walk away from a relationship that diminishes you, even when that relationship comes wrapped in wealth and privilege. So many of us have faced that moment when we must choose between comfort and freedom, between the life others expect us to want and the life our souls need to thrive. As we witness this powerful story unfold, I want you to remember that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Whether you're the one who needed to leave or the one who needs to make amends, healing begins with truth, even when that truth arrives in unexpected ways. So settle in, my sisters, as we explore what happens when past and present collide, and a baby's innocent presence forces two people to confront who they truly are. For a moment, Vivian considered letting the call go to voicemail as she had done countless times before. But something, perhaps the culmination of months of therapy or simply the quiet strength she'd discovered in herself, made her set down the vegetable she was chopping and reach for the phone. "Hello, Dominic." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the thunderstorm of emotions his name alone could still evoke. Vivian. The single word carried a weight of recognition, relief, and something else, vulnerability perhaps, that she had never heard from him before. "You answered." "I did." She moved away from the counter, leaning against the wall where she could still see the baby monitor. "What do you want?" There was a pause and she could almost see him, impeccably dressed even at this hour, probably standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, the Chicago skyline glittering behind him like a personal backdrop to his empire. "I wanted to apologize." A small, bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Apologize? After 11 months of silence? After everything that happened? I know it's late. Too late, probably." His voice had lost the commanding tone that had once directed boardrooms and bent corporate rivals to his will. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking. A lot of work on myself." Vivian closed her eyes, memories washing over her in painful waves. The whirlwind romance with Chicago's most eligible bachelor, the fairy tale engagement that had made headlines, the gradual revelation of the man behind the billion-dollar facade, the control that had started as protectiveness but grew into something suffocating, the arguments that began as passionate disagreements but evolved into cold, calculated dismantling of her confidence. The final, devastating night when she discovered just how far he would go to maintain his perfect image. "It's too late for apologies, Dominic." She kept her voice low, mindful of the sleeping baby just down the hall. "Everything has changed. I know I hurt you." He pressed on, desperation creeping into his voice. "The things I said, the way I treated you, the way you controlled me," she corrected. "The way you isolated me from my friends, criticized my work, made me question my own reality." Yes, the admission seemed to cost him something. All of it. "I was wrong, Vivian. So wrong." She glanced at the baby monitor again, watching the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's chest. The daughter Dominic knew nothing about. The daughter who had saved her in ways she couldn't have imagined when she'd walked away from his penthouse that rainy April night, carrying nothing but her purse and the secret growing inside her. "Why now?" she asked, genuine curiosity mixing with her caution. "Why call after all this time?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its practiced smoothness. "I've been in therapy, intensive therapy, for 6 months now. My My sister insisted after what happened with you. After you left. Vivian raised an eyebrow, surprised. Dominic had always dismissed therapy as crutches for the weak. His sister Eliza, the only person in his life who had ever stood up to him, had been trying to get him to see someone for years. Eliza finally got through to you then? She did. Another pause. She told me I'd lost the only woman who ever loved me for myself. Not my money or power. And she was right. Vivian felt a complicated knot of emotions tighten in her chest. Vindication. Sorrow. A dangerous flicker of something she couldn't afford to feel anymore. I'm glad you're getting help, Dominic. I really am. She meant it despite everything. But it doesn't change what happened between us. I know. His voice dropped lower. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did. Who I was. And I'm trying to be better. The baby monitor lit up as her daughter stirred, making a small sound before settling again. Vivian's heart clenched. I have to go, she said abruptly. Vivian, please. Goodbye, Dominic. She ended the call before he could say anything else. Before the complicated emotions his voice stirred could weaken her resolve. For a long moment, she stood motionless in her kitchen, the half-prepared dinner forgotten. Then she moved to the window, looking out at the modest but charming view of her neighborhood. So different from the spectacular vistas of Dominic's world, but so much more real, so much more hers. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after a relationship that tried to diminish you, hit that like button right now. She had built this life from scratch after leaving him, found this garden apartment in a quiet Chicago neighborhood far from the glittering downtown towers, secured a position at a small but respected architectural firm that valued her creativity rather than just her connections. Created a home where she and her daughter could thrive without the suffocating weight of expectations and control. Vivian touched her reflection in the window, tracing the outline of a face that had changed subtly but significantly in the past year. The shadows under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights with a newborn, but there was a clarity in her gaze that had been missing during her time with Dominic, a certainty about who she was and what she deserved. Mama's here, little one, she whispered, though her daughter couldn't hear her. And we're going to be just fine. She returned to her abandoned dinner preparations, chopping vegetables with renewed purpose. As she worked, her mind drifted back to the moment she discovered she was pregnant, just 6 weeks after leaving Dominic. She'd been sitting on the floor of her tiny bathroom in the temporary apartment she'd rented, staring at the positive test with a mixture of terror and wonder. Her first thought had been practical. How would she manage financially? Her second had been protective. How would she keep this child safe from Dominic's controlling influence? But her third thought, the one that had ultimately guided her decision, was simpler. This baby deserved a mother who was whole, who knew her own worth, who could model strength rather than submission. That night, she'd made 2 promises: to never tell Dominic about the pregnancy, and to build a life where her child would never witness her being diminished by anyone. Now, as she finished preparing a simple dinner for one, Vivian wondered if she'd made the right choice. Not about leaving, she'd never doubted that decision, but about keeping Lily's existence a secret. Did a child have the right to know their father, even if that father had been emotionally abusive to their mother? Did Dominic have the right to know he had a daughter, regardless of how he treated Vivian? These questions had haunted her for months, but she'd always circled back to the same conclusion. Until Dominic proved he could respect boundaries and treat people as equals rather than possessions, he wasn't safe to have in their lives. And yet, he was in therapy. He had apologized. He had admitted he was wrong. Was it possible he had actually changed? Vivian shook her head, dismissing the thought. One phone call didn't erase months of manipulation and control. People like Dominic didn't change. They just found new strategies to get what they wanted. After dinner, she checked on Lily, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. At 8 months old, she was already showing hints of Dominic's features, the same striking blue-gray eyes, the same determined set to her chin. But her spirit was all her own, curious and joyful and resilient in a way that sometimes took Vivian's breath away. "You're the best decision I ever made," she whispered, gently stroking her daughter's dark hair. No matter what happens. Later, as she prepared for bed, Vivian found herself thinking about the first time she'd met Dominic Blackwood, 3 years earlier at a charity gala for Chicago's historic architecture preservation. She'd been there representing her firm, a junior architect excited to network with potential clients. He'd been there as one of the city's most prominent developers, a man whose name was synonymous with the gleaming towers reshaping the skyline. Their meeting had been almost cinematic in its perfection. She'd been studying the detailed model of a historic theater his foundation was restoring, so absorbed that she'd bumped into him, spilling champagne on his undoubtedly expensive suit. "I'm so sorry," she'd gasped, mortified. Instead of the irritation she'd expected, he'd looked at her with genuine amusement. "It's just a suit," he'd said, his voice warm and rich. "The question is, what do you think of the restoration plans?" Surprised by his interest, she'd given her honest opinion, that while the exterior preservation was impressive, the interior redesign sacrificed too much of the original character for modern convenience. She'd immediately regretted her candor, certain she'd offended him. But instead, he'd studied her thoughtfully before asking, "What would you do differently?" That question had launched a 2-hour conversation, during which they'd moved from the crowded gala to a quiet corner of the venue's rooftop garden. Under a canopy of stars and city lights, they discussed architecture, preservation, the soul of cities, and the responsibility of those who shaped them. By the end of the evening, Vivian had been captivated, not just by his obvious intelligence and charm, but by his apparent willingness to listen, to consider perspectives different from his own. When he'd asked for her number, she'd given it without hesitation. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of exclusive restaurants, private jets to weekend getaways, and intimate conversations that made her feel truly seen for perhaps the first time in her life. Dominic had seemed genuinely interested in her ideas, her ambitions, her vision for her career. He'd introduced her to influential people in the architecture world, opened doors she hadn't even known existed. "You have extraordinary talent," he'd told her one night as they lay tangled together in the sheets of his penthouse bedroom. "The world should see what you can do." For the first 3 months, Vivian had felt like she was living a fairy tale, the talented but unknown architect discovered by the brilliant billionaire who valued her mind as much as her beauty. The shift had been so gradual she'd barely noticed it happening. A casual comment about a dress being a bit too revealing for a professional event. A question about why she needed to meet that particular colleague for drinks. A suggestion that perhaps her design concept was a bit too ambitious for her level of experience. Each comment, each question, each suggestion had seemed reasonable in isolation. It was only in retrospect that she could see the pattern, the slow, methodical way he'd begun to reshape her according to his vision. By the 6-month mark, she'd found herself checking her appearance in the mirror before he came home, wondering if her outfit would meet with his approval. She'd started declining invitations from friends he'd subtly criticized. She'd begun second-guessing her professional judgments when they differed from his. And still, she'd believed they were in love, that he wanted what was best for her, that his greater experience in the world meant he knew better than she did about so many things. The engagement had come at the 8-month mark, a breathtaking ring, a proposal atop the tallest building in his real estate portfolio, with the entire Chicago skyline as their witness. She'd said yes through tears of joy, believing she'd found her partner, her champion, her home. The headlines had been immediate and overwhelming. Real estate mogul Dominic Blackwood to wed unknown architect. Chicago's most eligible bachelor finally caught. Fairy tale romance for billionaire developer. The public scrutiny had been intense, and Dominic had been protective, arranging for private security, screening her calls, managing her social media presence for her own good. At the time, she'd been grateful for his protection from the sudden invasion of privacy. It was only later that she realized how effectively he'd used that protection to isolate her, to position himself as the buffer between her and the world, to make her increasingly dependent on him for both professional opportunities and personal validation. By the time she'd begun to recognize the true nature of their relationship, they were 10 months in, 2 months from the wedding, and she'd already lost touch with most of her friends, become estranged from family members who'd expressed concerns about the relationship's intensity, and grown accustomed to seeking Dominic's approval before making even minor decisions. The realization hadn't come as a sudden epiphany but as a slow, creeping horror, the gradual understanding that the man she loved, the man she'd agreed to marry, was systematically erasing the woman she'd been and replacing her with a carefully curated version of herself that better suited his needs and image. But even then, she might have gone through with the wedding if not for that final, devastating night, the night she discovered just how far Dominic Blackwood would go to maintain control. 3 days after Dominic's unexpected call, Vivian was gathering her things to leave work when her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy. "There's a man in a very expensive suit sitting in a car outside your building. Been there for almost an hour. Should I be concerned?" Vivian's stomach dropped. She knew instantly who it was. Dominic had always been persistent when he wanted something. It was how he'd built his real estate empire from nothing, how he'd pursued her despite her initial reluctance, how he tried to shape her into his vision of the perfect partner. "I'll handle it, Mrs. A. Thank you for letting me know." She texted her babysitter next, asking her to stay a bit longer, then called an Uber instead of taking her usual train. During the ride, she tried to calm her racing thoughts. What did he want? Why come in person after that phone call? What would she say to him? By the time the Uber pulled up half a block from her building, Vivian had centered herself. She spotted his car immediately, a sleek black Bentley that stood out like an exotic bird among the practical sedans and SUVs of her neighborhood. As she approached, the driver's door opened, and Dominic stepped out. He looked both exactly the same and somehow different. The bespoke suit, the perfectly styled dark hair with distinguished touches of silver at the temples, the commanding presence that seemed to bend the very air around him, all unchanged. But there was something different in his posture, less rigid perhaps, and definitely something new in his eyes as they found hers. "You shouldn't be here," she said without preamble, stopping several feet away from him. "I know." He made no move to come closer, respecting the distance she'd established. "But I needed to see you." "Why?" She crossed her arms, aware of curious glances from neighbors walking dogs or returning from work. "What could you possibly have to say that couldn't be said over the phone?" "That I'm sorry." His voice was quiet but carried clearly in the evening air. "That I was wrong. That losing you was the wake-up call I needed. And you thought showing up unannounced was the way to demonstrate you've changed?" She raised an eyebrow. "That you respect boundaries now?" He flinched slightly, acknowledging the hit. "I didn't think it through. Old habits." "Exactly," she sighed, glancing toward her building. Mrs. Abernathy was not so subtly watching from her first-floor window. "Look, you can't just appear in my life again, Dominic. I've moved on. I've built something new. I can see that." His eyes followed her gaze to the modest but well-maintained brownstone. "It suits you, more than my place ever did." The admission surprised her. The Dominic she'd known would never have acknowledged that anything could be better than what he provided. "Why are you really here?" she asked, softening her tone slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty she'd rarely seen from him. "I've been doing this intensive therapy program. Part of it is making amends, really facing the people I've hurt." He met her eyes directly. "You're at the top of that list, Vivian." She studied him, looking for the manipulation, the calculated charm that had once swept her off her feet. But all she saw was a man struggling with genuine remorse, and perhaps something else, something that looked almost like hope. "5 minutes," she said finally. "You can come up for 5 minutes. Say what you need to say, and then you need to leave." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. If you believe in standing your ground even when facing someone who once held all the power, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories of women reclaiming their strength." As they walked toward her building, Vivian sent a quick text to her babysitter. "Unexpected visitor. Please take Lily to your apartment until I text again." By the time they reached her door, Vivian's heart was pounding. No one from her old life with Dominic had ever seen her new home, her new reality. The worlds had remained separate, like parallel universes that never touched. Until now. It's not what you're used to, she said as she unlocked the door, suddenly self-conscious despite herself. I'm not here to judge your home, Vivian. She led him into the living room, a warm, inviting space filled with second-hand furniture she'd lovingly restored, colorful textiles, and architectural sketches framed on the walls. Evidence of her daughter was everywhere. A soft blanket draped over the couch, a tiny pair of shoes by the door, a collection of board books stacked on the coffee table. Dominic took it all in, his expression unreadable. You've made a beautiful home. Thank you. She remained standing, making it clear this wasn't a social visit. You said you wanted to make amends. He nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. What I did to you was unforgivable. The control, the criticism, the gaslighting. I see it all now. I told myself I was protecting you, supporting you, but I was really just trying to make you into someone who wouldn't threaten me. Threaten you? She hadn't expected this level of self-awareness. Your independence. Your brilliance. He gestured to the architectural sketches. You are extraordinary, Vivian, and instead of celebrating that, I tried to dim it because it made me feel insecure. She blinked, surprised by his candor. You never seemed insecure about anything. A sad smile crossed his face. That was the biggest lie of all. The one I told myself. He took a deep breath. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to believe I've changed. But I needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you. Vivian felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a kind of peace. Thank you for saying that. It matters. He nodded, glancing around the room again. You seem happy here. You've built a good life. I have. She followed his gaze as it landed on a framed photo of her holding Lily. Their faces turned away from the camera as they looked out over Lake Michigan. A very good life. Something in his expression changed as he registered what he was seeing, the unmistakable silhouette of a mother and infant. You have a child? Before Vivian could respond, a sound came from down the hall, the babysitter's voice, followed by a baby's happy gurgle. Viv? Sorry to interrupt, but Lily needs you. She won't take the bottle from me. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes widening as the babysitter appeared in the doorway, holding a squirming 8-month-old with a shock of dark hair and striking blue-gray eyes identical to his own. Time seemed to stop as Dominic stared at the baby, comprehension dawning across his face in waves. The timing, the familiar features, the reason Vivian had disappeared so completely. Is she? His voice failed him. Vivian moved to take her daughter, who immediately calmed in her arms. Yes, she said simply. This is Lily, my daughter. Our daughter, he whispered, the words barely audible. The babysitter, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself, promising to return tomorrow at the usual time. For a long moment after the door closed, neither Vivian nor Dominic spoke. Lily babbled happily in her mother's arms, oblivious to the emotional earthquake shaking the foundations of the adult's world. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. Vivian held her daughter closer. You know why. And he did. The last night they were together, the night she discovered he'd been monitoring her calls, had hired someone to follow her when she met with friends he didn't approve of, had been systematically isolating her from anyone who might negatively influence her. The night she'd confronted him and he'd coldly informed her that once they were married, he expected her to give up her hobby of architecture and focus on being the perfect wife and hostess his position demanded. It had started with a misdirected text message. Vivian had been working late at the office, finalizing designs for a community center project she'd been passionate about, when her phone had chimed with a message from an unknown number. Subject followed target to Meridian Coffee on Michigan Avenue meeting with R. Wilson again. Photos attached as requested. Before she could process what she was reading, 3 photos had appeared. Images of herself, leaving her office building, walking to a nearby coffee shop, and sitting across from Rachel Wilson, her former college roommate and closest friend, whom Dominic had repeatedly suggested was unstable and jealous of their relationship. Confused and increasingly alarmed, Vivian had called the number. A man had answered, immediately professional, Sentinel Security. Who requested surveillance on Vivian Monroe? She'd asked, her voice shaking. There had been a pause. Then, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't discuss client matters. I am Vivian Monroe, she'd said, and I think you just sent me photos of myself by mistake. Another pause, longer this time. I need to speak with my supervisor. Please hold. But Vivian had already hung up, her mind racing. She'd gone straight to Dominic's penthouse, using her key to let herself in. He'd been in his home office on a conference call, but had ended it immediately when he saw her expression. What's wrong? He'd asked, rising from his desk. Without a word, she'd shown him the text and photos. She'd expected denial, perhaps, or at least surprise. What she hadn't expected was the flash of irritation that had crossed his face before he'd composed himself. It's not what you think, he'd said, his voice calm and reasonable. There have been threats against some of my projects. I hired security for both of us. Then why was I being followed to a coffee shop with Rachel? Why were photos being taken? Why wasn't I told? I didn't want to worry you. He'd moved toward her, reaching for her hands, but she'd stepped back. And frankly, I was concerned about Rachel's influence. She's never supported our relationship. Because she saw what I couldn't, Vivian had whispered, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The way you were isolating me, controlling me. Don't be dramatic, Vivian. His tone had hardened slightly. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future. No, the clarity had been sudden and overwhelming. It's been for you, for your image, for your comfort. His expression had changed then, the mask of concern slipping to reveal something colder. You're upset. We'll discuss this tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, she'd said. Tell me the truth, Dominic. How long have you been having me followed? How many of my conversations have you monitored? How many of my friendships have you deliberately undermined? Instead of denying it, he'd sighed, as if dealing with a petulant child. You don't understand the world I operate in, Vivian. The position you'll hold as my wife. There are expectations, standards that must be maintained. Standards? She'd echoed, incredulous. Yes, and part of that means leaving certain distractions behind. He gestured dismissively. Your little architectural projects. These friends who don't understand our world. Once we're married, you'll have new responsibilities, new priorities. You mean your responsibilities. Your priorities. Our priorities, he'd corrected, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd come to dread. You knew who I was when you accepted my proposal. Did you really think nothing would change? I thought we were partners, she'd said, her voice breaking. I thought you loved me for who I am. I do love you, he'd insisted, reaching for her again. I'm trying to help you become the best version of yourself. She'd backed away, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the future that awaited her if she stayed. A life of increasing isolation, of diminishing autonomy, of slowly disappearing into Dominic's shadow until there was nothing left of the woman she'd been. No, she'd said, removing her engagement ring and placing it on his desk. You're trying to turn me into the best version of what you want. And I can't do it anymore. She'd left that night, in the pouring rain, taking nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. She'd gone to a hotel, paid cash, and spent the night alternating between tears and a strange, liberating sense of relief. The next day, she'd arranged for a friend to collect some of her things from Dominic's penthouse while he was at work, had found a temporary apartment, and had begun the process of rebuilding her life. 6 weeks later, she'd discovered she was pregnant. Now, standing in her modest living room with Lily in her arms and Dominic staring at them both with naked emotion, Vivian finished recounting that night. I couldn't bring a child into that environment, she said quietly. I couldn't let her grow up watching her mother being controlled and diminished. I couldn't risk you doing the same to her. Dominic's face crumpled, the carefully maintained facade of the billionaire developer completely gone. He sank onto the edge of the couch, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. "She has my eyes," he said, his voice breaking. "And your stubborn chin." Despite everything, Vivian felt a pang of sympathy for him. "She's determined, like both of us. May I?" He hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward the baby. "Could I hold her?" Vivian hesitated. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment, if she'd ever imagined it at all. But looking at Dominic now, seeing the naked vulnerability in his expression, she made a decision. "Sit back," she instructed. And when he did, she carefully placed Lily in his arms, showing him how to support her head even though she was well past needing it. The moment Lily settled against him, looking up with curious eyes at this new person, something extraordinary happened. Dominic Blackwood, ruthless negotiator, empire builder, man who prided himself on never showing weakness, began to cry. Not dignified single tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from some long-sealed vault within him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words meant for both of them. "I'm so sorry." Lily, startled by this emotional display, reached up a tiny hand and patted his wet cheek, a gesture of innocent comfort that only made him cry harder. Vivian stood watching, her own eyes filling with tears. This wasn't the confrontation she'd expected. This wasn't the manipulative, controlling man she'd fled from. This was someone broken open, facing the consequences of his actions in the most profound way possible. "I didn't know," he said when he could finally speak again, looking up at Vivian with red-rimmed eyes. "I would have." "What?" she interrupted gently. "What would you have done, Dominic? The man you were then." He looked down at Lily, who had settled contentedly against his chest, and shook his head. "I don't know. Nothing right, probably." He touched Lily's dark hair with trembling fingers. "But I want to do right now, if you'll let me." Vivian sat down in the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted. "What does that mean to you? Doing right?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "I've never been a father. Never thought I would be." He looked at her directly. "But I want to try. Not to control or to take over, but to be present. To support you both, however you'll allow me to." "It's not that simple," she said. "You can't just walk in and claim fatherhood after everything that happened." "I know." He nodded, still cradling Lily with surprising gentleness. "I know I have to earn your trust. I know that might take years if it happens at all. But she's my daughter too, Vivian. And I want to be in her life if you'll let me." Vivian watched as Lily grabbed Dominic's finger, her tiny hand wrapping around it with the instinctive grip of infancy. The sight stirred complicated emotions: protectiveness, uncertainty, and a reluctant acknowledgement that regardless of their past, this man was her daughter's father. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make tonight." "Of course." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need." They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound Lily's occasional happy gurgle as she explored Dominic's watch with curious fingers. "She's extraordinary," he said softly, watching their daughter with wonder. "Just like her mother." The compliment, delivered without his former calculating charm, caught Vivian off guard. "Thank you. I mean it." He looked up, his expression earnest. "I mean it." He looked up, his expression earnest. "Everything you've built here, this home, your career, raising our daughter alone, it's remarkable. I don't think I fully understood your strength until this moment." Vivian wasn't sure how to respond to this new Dominic, this man who seemed capable of genuine admiration without the undercurrent of control. Before she could formulate a reply, Lily began to fuss, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. "She's getting tired," Vivian said, rising to take her. "It's past her bedtime." Dominic relinquished the baby reluctantly, his hands lingering for a moment as if trying to memorize the feel of her. "She's perfect," he whispered. "I should put her down," Vivian said, needing a moment alone to collect her thoughts. "Wait here." In the nursery, a cheerful room painted in soft yellows and greens, Vivian went through Lily's bedtime routine on autopilot, her mind racing. The man sitting in her living room seemed genuinely transformed by the sight of his daughter. But was it real? Was it lasting? Or would the controlling, manipulative Dominic resurface once the shock wore off? As she laid Lily in her crib, singing softly until the baby's eyes fluttered closed, Vivian found herself at a crossroads. She could ask Dominic to leave and take time to process everything that had happened. She could consult with a lawyer about establishing formal custody arrangements. She could even, theoretically, try to keep him out of Lily's life entirely, though she suspected he would fight that decision with all the considerable resources at his disposal. Or she could take a leap of faith, a cautious one with clear boundaries, and see if the man who had just held his daughter with such tenderness was truly different from the man she'd fled 11 months ago. When she returned to the living room, Dominic was standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street. He turned when he heard her, his expression still raw with emotion. "She's asleep," Vivian said, keeping her voice low. He nodded. "Thank you for letting me meet her, for letting me hold her. I know you didn't have to do that." "No, I didn't." She crossed her arms, studying him. "But she deserves to know her father. And this is a very big if, Dominic, if you can prove that you've really changed." Hope flickered across his face. "What would that look like to you? Proving I've changed?" It was a fair question, one Vivian had been asking herself since his unexpected appearance. Respect for boundaries, for starters. No more showing up unannounced. No investigating me or my friends. No trying to control how I raise Lily or live my life. "Agreed," he said immediately. "Completely agreed. And I need to see consistency. Not just words or grand gestures, but sustained effort over time." "I understand." He took a deep breath. "Would you consider allowing me to see her occasionally? To start building a relationship with her? Under whatever conditions make you comfortable." Vivian considered this. Part of her wanted to delay, to take weeks to think through all the implications. But another part recognized that Lily was growing and changing every day. If Dominic was genuinely committed to being a father, perhaps it wasn't fair to either of them to postpone that connection unnecessarily. "We could start with short visits," she said cautiously. "Here where she feels secure. Once a week, maybe." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. That's more than I had any right to expect. And I want to talk to your therapist," she added. "Not about the details of your sessions, but to confirm that you're genuinely doing the work." He nodded without hesitation. "I'll have Dr. Winters call you tomorrow, with your permission." "Good." She moved toward the door, signaling that their time was up. "And Dominic? If at any point I feel that your presence is harmful to Lily or to me, this arrangement ends." Immediately. "I understand." He stood, gathering his coat. "I won't let either of you down again." As he reached the door, he paused, turning back to her with an expression of such naked vulnerability that it momentarily took her breath away. "I know I have no right to ask this, but could I have a photo of her? Just to have with me?" The request was so simple, so human, that Vivian found herself nodding. She took out her phone, scrolled through her gallery, and selected a recent picture of Lily laughing in her high chair, sunlight catching the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "I'll text it to you," she said, sending the image to his number. "Thank you." His voice was thick with emotion as his phone chimed with the incoming message. He glanced at the screen, a smile breaking through his tears. "She's beautiful. Like you." The compliment hung in the air between them, neither fully accepted nor rejected. Then Dominic straightened his shoulders, composing himself. "I'll wait for your call about when I can visit. On your terms, Vivian. Always on your terms from now on." After he left, Vivian leaned against the closed door, emotions washing over her in waves. Anger at the man who had tried to control her. Fear about what his reappearance might mean for the life she'd built. Confusion about the apparent sincerity of his transformation. And beneath it all, a tiny, dangerous flicker of something she wasn't ready to name. Something that remembered the man she'd fallen in love with, before the control and manipulation had poisoned everything. If you believe that true change is possible even after terrible mistakes, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and accountability. The next morning, Vivian received a call from Dr. Catherine Winters, Dominic's therapist. The conversation was brief but illuminating. Without violating confidentiality, Dr. Winters confirmed that Dominic had been in intensive therapy for 6 months, was doing profound work on understanding the roots of his controlling behavior, and was genuinely committed to transformation. "I can't promise you he'll never struggle again," Dr. Winters said candidly. "Patterns established over a lifetime don't disappear overnight. But I can tell you that in my 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen someone confront their demons with such determination." "What changed?" Vivian couldn't help asking. "He was so resistant to therapy before." There was a pause on the line. "I can't share specifics, but I will say that sometimes it takes losing something irreplaceable to recognize the cost of one's behavior. Dominic hit what we call a rock bottom after you left." After the call, Vivian sat at her kitchen table, watching Lily play with colorful blocks on her activity mat. The baby was blissfully unaware of the life-altering decisions being made around her, focused entirely on the joy of stacking one block atop another, only to knock them down with a delighted giggle. "What do you think, little one?" Vivian asked softly. "Should we give your daddy a chance to know you?" Lily looked up at the sound of her mother's voice, offering a gummy smile that melted Vivian's heart. Whatever she decided, it would be with this smile in mind. This innocent joy that deserved protection above all else. That evening, Vivian texted Dominic. "Saturday morning, 10 a.m. You can spend an hour with Lily. We'll be here." His response came immediately. "Thank you. I'll be there. Is there anything I should bring or no?" The question was so practical, so focused on Lily's needs rather than his own desires, that Vivian found herself softening slightly. She loves books with textures she can touch, and she's starting to pull herself up on furniture, so watch your coffee if you bring any. Noted. No coffee, yes to texture books. I'll see you both Saturday. The exchange was cordial, almost businesslike, but underneath ran currents of emotion neither of them was ready to address directly. Saturday arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. Vivian dressed Lily in a cozy sweater and leggings, trying not to overthink the significance of the day. At precisely 10 a.m., there was a gentle knock at the door. Dominic stood on the threshold, looking both nervous and determined. He carried a small gift bag but was otherwise empty-handed. No grand gestures, no extravagant presents, just a man coming to meet his daughter properly for the first time. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully modulated. "Thank you for this." Vivian nodded, stepping back to let him in. "She's in a good mood this morning. Just had breakfast." The living room had been transformed into a play area, with soft blankets spread on the floor and toys arranged within Lily's reach. The baby sat amid her treasures, examining a colorful rattle with scholarly concentration. Dominic approached slowly, kneeling at the edge of the blanket. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. At the sound of his voice, Lily looked up, studying this new person with curious eyes. After a moment of consideration, she offered him the rattle, the highest form of baby approval. "Thank you," Dominic said seriously, accepting the gift. "That's very generous of you." Vivian watched from a slight distance, giving them space while remaining present. There was something surreal about seeing Dominic Blackwood, the man whose name graced some of Chicago's most impressive buildings, sitting cross-legged on her living room floor, completely focused on an 8-month-old's babbling conversation. "I brought you something," he told Lily, opening the gift bag. Inside was a cloth book with different textures on each page. Soft fur, crinkly foil, smooth satin. Nothing extravagant or showy, just a thoughtful gift suited to her developmental stage. Lily immediately reached for the book, delighted by the sensory experience. Dominic guided her tiny hands over the pages, narrating with genuine enthusiasm. "That's a bunny. Feel how soft. And this is a fish with shiny scales." As the hour progressed, Vivian found herself relaxing incrementally. Dominic was natural with Lily, patient and attentive without being overbearing. He followed the baby's lead, letting her set the pace of their interaction, celebrating her small achievements with authentic joy. When Lily began to rub her eyes, signaling her morning nap was approaching, Dominic recognized the cue without being told. "Someone's getting sleepy," he observed, helping gather the toys they'd been playing with. "She'll need to go down for her nap soon," Vivian confirmed. Dominic nodded, standing reluctantly. "Same time next week?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. "Yes," Vivian found herself saying. "That would be fine." At the door he paused. "Thank you, Vivian, for today. For giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." "I'm not doing it for you," she reminded him gently. "I'm doing it for Lily." "I know." His smile was tinged with sadness. "But I'm grateful nonetheless." After he left, Vivian put Lily down for her nap, then sat in the nursery rocker, processing the morning. The man who had just spent an hour playing with their daughter seemed worlds away from the controlling figure who had monitored her calls and hired someone to follow her. Was it possible for someone to change so fundamentally? Or was this just another performance? Another manipulation? Only time would tell. And for Lily's sake, Vivian was willing to wait and see. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to their lives. Dominic came every Saturday morning, spending an hour with Lily while Vivian remained nearby. As Lily grew more comfortable with him, their interactions deepened. He learned her favorite songs, the toys that made her laugh, the subtle differences between her hungry cry and her tired fussing. For his part, Dominic maintained scrupulous respect for the boundaries Vivian had established. He never arrived early or stayed late. He never brought extravagant gifts or tried to impress with his wealth. He never questioned Vivian's parenting decisions or suggested alternatives unless specifically asked. He was, in every observable way, honoring his promise to do things on her terms. One Saturday in late November, as the first snow of the season dusted Chicago streets, Dominic arrived for his usual visit looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Is everything okay?" Vivian asked as she let him in. "Yes," he said quickly. "Everything's fine. I wanted to ask you something, and I'm not sure how you'll feel about it." Vivian tensed slightly. "What is it?" "Next Saturday is Lily's 9-month birthday," he began carefully. "I was wondering if, instead of our usual hour here, I could take you both to the Lincoln Park Conservatory. It's warm inside, and there's a holiday flower show that I thought Lily might enjoy. All the colors and textures." He rushed to add, "You'd be with us the entire time, of course. It would just be a change of scenery." Vivian considered the request. Over the past weeks, she'd seen consistent evidence of Dominic's commitment to being a good father. He'd never once pressured her for more time or different arrangements. And the conservatory was a public place, safe and appropriate for a baby Lily's age. "That sounds nice, actually," she found herself saying. "Lily and I could use a change of scenery." Relief washed over his features. "Great. I can pick you up, or meet you there, whatever you prefer." "We'll meet you there," Vivian said, maintaining that small boundary. 11 o'clock? Perfect." He smiled, then turned his attention to Lily, who was babbling excitedly from her play mat, clearly recognizing her Saturday morning visitor. The conservatory outing marked a subtle shift in their arrangement. While Vivian remained vigilant, she found herself gradually allowing Dominic more natural interactions with Lily. They established a routine of weekly excursions to child-friendly locations, the aquarium, the children's museum, quiet corners of local cafes with play areas. Through it all, Dominic remained consistent. He never pushed for more than Vivian offered. He never attempted to leverage his wealth or influence to impress either of them. He simply showed up, week after week, fully present and genuinely engaged with his daughter's development. As Christmas approached, Vivian faced a dilemma. Her parents had invited her and Lily to spend the holiday at their home in Michigan, a tradition she'd maintained even during her relationship with Dominic. But this year, the thought of Dominic spending Christmas alone, without seeing Lily, stirred unexpected compassion. After much consideration, she called him one evening after Lily was asleep. I wanted to let you know that Lily and I will be at my parents' from the 23rd through the 27th, she began. So we'll miss our regular Saturday. I understand, he said, disappointment evident in his voice despite his attempt to hide it. Family traditions are important. Please give your parents my regards. Vivian took a deep breath. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to see Lily before we leave. Perhaps on the 22nd? We could meet somewhere festive, maybe Millennium Park to see the Christmas tree. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. When Dominic finally responded, his voice was thick with emotion. I'd love that. Thank you, Vivian. The outing to see Chicago's massive Christmas tree became another milestone in their evolving arrangement. Bundled against the December cold, the three of them wandered through the holiday displays, Lily wide-eyed with wonder at the twinkling lights and festive decorations. Dominic pushed the stroller with practiced ease, pointing out decorations and narrating the experience for Lily's benefit. As they stopped for hot chocolate and a bottle for Lily, Dominic handed Vivian a small, wrapped package. It's not much, he said quickly. Just something small for Lily's first Christmas. I wanted her to have it before you left for Michigan. Vivian unwrapped it carefully to find a sterling silver ornament in the shape of a star, engraved with Lily's name and birth date. It was tasteful and meaningful without being ostentatious, exactly the kind of gift that showed thoughtfulness rather than an attempt to impress with extravagance. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Thank you. There's a tradition, he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. A star for the first Christmas, and then each year after, a different ornament that represents something significant from that year of her life. My grandmother did it for me, and I thought, well, I hoped it might be something we could continue for Lily. The suggestion of future Christmases, of ongoing traditions, hung in the air between them. It was the first time either had explicitly acknowledged that their arrangement might extend indefinitely into the future. I think she'd like that, Vivian said softly, watching as Lily reached for the shiny ornament with curious fingers. As they parted that evening, Dominic hesitated before saying goodbye. I've been meaning to tell you something, he said, his breath visible in the cold air. I'm stepping back from active management at Blackwood Development. What? Vivian was genuinely surprised. Dominic's company had been his life, his identity, the empire he'd built from the ground up. Why would you do that? I'm not leaving entirely, he clarified, just transitioning to a chairman role rather than CEO. I've promoted Eliza to take over day-to-day operations. Your sister. Vivian knew Eliza had worked in the company for years, but Dominic had always maintained tight control over every aspect of the business. He nodded. She's more than qualified. Has been for years, if I'm honest. A rueful smile crossed his face. My therapist helped me see that my need to control everything, the company, my relationships, every detail of my life, was destroying what mattered most. And you're okay with stepping back? She asked, still processing this revelation. More than okay. His gaze drifted to Lily, sleeping peacefully in her stroller. I want different things now. Time to be present. Space to continue my therapy work. The chance to be a father, if you'll allow it. He looked back at Vivian, his expression earnest. I don't want to miss any more of her life than I already have. The decision was so fundamentally contrary to the Dominic she'd known, the man whose identity had been inextricably linked to his position and power, that Vivian found herself momentarily speechless. That's a significant change, she finally managed. The most important one I've made, he agreed. But not the only one. They said their goodbyes with the promise to resume their regular visits after the holidays. As Vivian pushed Lily's stroller toward the train station, she found herself contemplating this new information. Dominic stepping back from his company was tangible evidence of transformation, perhaps the most convincing she'd seen yet. The Christmas visit to Michigan brought its own revelations. Vivian's parents, who had met Dominic only a handful of times during their relationship, were naturally curious about the father of their granddaughter suddenly being involved in her life. Are you sure about this, Vivi? Her mother asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Lily asleep upstairs. After everything he put you through? Vivian considered the question carefully. I'm not sure of anything except that Lily deserves to know her father if he's genuinely committed to being in her life. And so far, he seems to be. People like that don't change, her father said, the protective instinct of a parent who had seen his daughter hurt still evident in his voice. Maybe not usually, Vivian acknowledged, but I've seen something in him these past months that's different. He's humbler, more thoughtful. He listens in a way he never did before. Her mother studied her face. And how do you feel about him now? It was the question Vivian had been avoiding asking herself. I don't know, she admitted. I haven't let myself think about that. Right now, it's about what's best for Lily. Just be careful, her father advised. Guard your heart as carefully as you guard that precious little girl. Returning to Chicago after Christmas, Vivian found herself both anticipating and dreading the resumption of their Saturday routine. The time away had given her space to reflect on the gradual evolution of their arrangement, from strictly supervised visits in her apartment to outings around the city, from rigid boundaries to a more natural co-parenting dynamic. When Dominic arrived that first Saturday in January, he brought not only a small gift for Lily, a plush polar bear that immediately became her favorite, but also a proposal. I've been thinking, he said as they watched Lily explore her new toy. Lily's getting more active, more aware of her surroundings. My apartment isn't really suitable for a child her age. Too many breakable things, too many hard surfaces. He hesitated, then continued. I found a place in Lincoln Park with a fenced yard and a nursery. Nothing extravagant, just somewhere safe where she could spend time occasionally. If you're comfortable with that idea. Vivian raised an eyebrow. You bought a house just for Saturday visits? Not exactly. He looked slightly embarrassed. I've been wanting to move out of the penthouse for a while. It never felt like a home, just a statement. The new place is smaller, warmer. Somewhere I could actually live, not just showcase success. Again, Vivian was struck by how fundamentally his priorities seemed to have shifted. The Dominic she'd known had been obsessed with appearances, with projecting power and success through his possessions and properties. I'd like to see it before Lily spends time there, she said cautiously. Of course. Relief washed over his features. Whenever you'd like. And I haven't finalized anything yet. I wanted your input on safety features, child-proofing, that sort of thing. The house in Lincoln Park turned out to be a revelation. Instead of the sleek, modern aesthetic that had defined his penthouse, Dominic had chosen a renovated Victorian with character and warmth. The furnishings were comfortable rather than showcases, the colors warm and inviting rather than the stark monochrome he'd previously preferred. Most telling was the nursery, which he'd clearly put thought into without going overboard. It was painted a soft green, with a simple crib, a comfortable rocker, and shelves filled with age-appropriate books and toys. A handmade mobile hung above the crib. Not an expensive designer piece, but something crafted with evident care. Did you make that? Vivian asked, gesturing to the mobile. Dominic nodded, looking slightly self-conscious. My therapist suggested I try working with my hands as a way to practice patience and mindfulness. I'm not particularly skilled, but... He shrugged. I wanted to create something for her. Vivian touched one of the felt animals hanging from the mobile, a little fox with carefully stitched details. It's beautiful, she said honestly. She'll love it. As winter melted into spring, their arrangement continued to evolve. Dominic now spent Saturday mornings with Lily at his house, with Vivian initially present for the entire time, then gradually comfortable enough to use the opportunity to run errands or meet friends for coffee, returning to pick up Lily after a few hours. By Lily's first birthday in May, they had established a functional co-parenting relationship that, while still carefully bounded, allowed both parents to be meaningfully involved in their daughter's life. The birthday celebration itself was a small affair in Vivian's backyard. Just family and close friends, with Dominic present not as an outsider but as Lily's father. Watching him help Lily blow out her single candle, his face alight with genuine joy at her delight in the frosting, Vivian felt something shift inside her. The anger and fear that had defined her feelings toward him for so long had gradually given way to something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps understanding. Recognition that people could indeed change when properly motivated and willing to do the difficult internal work. After the party, as Dominic helped clean up while Lily napped, exhausted from the excitement, he broached a subject they'd been dancing around for months. "I've been thinking about formalizing our arrangement," he said carefully, rinsing a plate before placing it in the dishwasher. "Not to change anything that's working, but just to provide some legal structure. For Lily's sake." Vivian tensed slightly. "What kind of legal structure?" "Nothing complicated. Just a co-parenting agreement that outlines what we're already doing. My time with Lily, financial support, decision-making processes." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I want to be clear that I'm not asking for more than you're comfortable giving. I'm grateful for every moment with her, on whatever terms you set." The old Vivian might have seen this as a power play, an attempt to use the legal system to gain control. But the past year had shown her a different Dominic, one who had consistently respected her boundaries, who had put Lily's needs above his own, who had demonstrated through actions rather than words that he was committed to being a good father. "I think that's reasonable," she said after a moment's consideration. "We should both have clarity and security in our arrangement." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. I'll have my lawyer draft something for your review. And of course, you should have your own attorney look it over." "I will." She appreciated that he'd suggested it without prompting, another small indication of his changed perspective. As he prepared to leave that evening, Dominic paused at the door. "There's something else I've been wanting to ask you," he said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his voice. "What is it? Would you consider having dinner with me sometime? Just the two of us." He rushed to add, "Not as a date necessarily. Just a chance to talk about Lily, about our arrangement, without having to divide our attention." Vivian studied him, surprised by the request and by her own reaction to it. A year ago, the idea of spending time alone with Dominic would have filled her with dread. Now, she found herself considering it without immediate rejection. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. He nodded, accepting her non-commitment without pushing. "That's all I ask." After he left, Vivian found herself standing at the window, watching as he walked to his car. No longer the ostentatious Bentley, but a practical SUV better suited for transporting a child. The man who had once controlled every aspect of her life had transformed into someone who asked rather than demanded, who accepted boundaries rather than pushing against them, who seemed genuinely content with whatever role she allowed him in their lives. Was it possible that the connection they'd once shared, before the control and manipulation had poisoned everything, could be rebuilt in some new form? Not necessarily romantic, but perhaps a friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for their daughter? The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. 2 weeks later, Vivian agreed to dinner. They met at a quiet neighborhood restaurant, not one of the exclusive establishments he'd once favored, but a warm, unpretentious place where they could talk without pretense or performance. "Thank you for coming," Dominic said as they settled at their table. "I know this isn't easy for you." "It's easier than I expected," she admitted. "A lot has changed in the past year." "Yes." His smile was tinged with sadness. "Though I wish it hadn't taken losing you to make me see what needed to change." They talked about Lily, of course, her recent achievements, her developing personality, the milestones ahead. But gradually, the conversation shifted to themselves, to the journey that had brought them to this unexpected place. "I've never properly apologized," Dominic said as they lingered over coffee. "Not for everything. Not in a way that acknowledges the full extent of what I did." "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Not for forgiveness. I don't expect that. But for accountability." He took a deep breath. "I controlled you. I isolated you. I tried to reshape you into someone who wouldn't threaten my fragile ego. I called it love, but it wasn't. It was possession, insecurity, fear disguised as protection." Vivian sat very still, the raw honesty of his words washing over her. "I've spent the past year trying to understand why I needed that control, why I couldn't love without possessing, why I saw your independence as a threat rather than a strength." He met her gaze directly. "It doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing could. But I want you to know that I see it now. All of it. And I'm doing everything in my power to ensure I never treat anyone that way again. Especially our daughter. Thank you for saying that, Vivian said softly. It matters. There's something else. He hesitated, then continued. I want you to know that I support whatever boundaries you need to maintain. If you never want more than a co-parenting relationship, I understand and respect that completely. Your well-being, your autonomy, your happiness, they matter to me now in a way they should have mattered before. The sincerity in his voice, the genuine remorse in his eyes, touched something deep within Vivian. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of healing. I don't know what the future holds for us, she said honestly, but I'm grateful that Lily will have a father who understands the importance of respect and boundaries, who can teach her that love should elevate, not diminish. That's all I want, he said simply, to be worthy of her, and perhaps someday worthy of your friendship. As they parted that night, something had shifted between them, not a return to what was, but perhaps the first tentative step toward something new, something healthier, something built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than fairy tale romance. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what resonated most with you. And remember, my queens, sometimes the happiest endings aren't about going back to what was, but creating something healthier than you ever thought possible. 1 year later, on a bright spring morning, Vivian stood in her kitchen watching through the window as Dominic pushed Lily on the swing he'd installed in the backyard. The little girl's laughter floated through the open window, a sound of pure joy that never failed to warm Vivian's heart. So much had changed in the 2 years since she'd fled Dominic's penthouse in the rain. The frightened, isolated woman she'd been then had transformed into someone stronger, more confident, more certain of her worth and boundaries. And Dominic, too, had changed. The controlling, insecure man who'd needed to possess what he loved had gradually become someone capable of supporting without smothering, of loving without demanding, of finding joy in Lily's independence rather than feeling threatened by it. Their co-parenting arrangement had evolved into a genuine partnership. Dominic now had Lily 2 days a week and alternate weekends. He attended her doctor's appointments and participated in decisions about her care. He contributed financially without using money as leverage. Most importantly, he consistently demonstrated respect for Vivian's boundaries and autonomy. They weren't a couple again. Perhaps they never would be. The wounds of their past were too deep, the breach of trust too fundamental to simply return to what had been. But they had found something perhaps more valuable. A friendship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the hard-earned wisdom that came from confronting their own flaws and failures. As Vivian watched Dominic lift Lily from the swing and spin her around, both of them laughing, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks along the way, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, when trust wavered, when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to move beyond. But they had persevered, for Lily's sake initially, and eventually for their own. They had learned that true strength wasn't found in control or perfection, but in vulnerability, in accountability, in the courage to change. Dominic looked up, catching Vivian watching them. He smiled. Not the calculated charm of the man she'd once known, but something more genuine, more humble. He set Lily down, and she immediately toddled toward the flower bed, fascinated by a butterfly that had landed on a bloom. "She's fearless," he said as he approached the kitchen window. "Gets that from her mother." Vivian smiled, accepting the compliment for what it was. Genuine admiration without an agenda. "She gets plenty from you too. That determination, that focus. Hopefully only the good parts," he said, a shadow of old regret crossing his face. "We're all works in progress," Vivian reminded him gently. "Even Lily." He nodded, his gaze returning to their daughter, who was now carefully examining a dandelion with scholarly concentration. "I never thought I could love someone this much," he admitted, "or that I could learn to love without needing to control." "You've come a long way," Vivian acknowledged. "We both have, and they had." The journey hadn't ended in the fairy tale reconciliation that stories often promised. There was no dramatic reunion, no passionate declaration that erased the past. Instead, there was something quieter but perhaps more meaningful. Two people who had hurt each other finding a way to heal, to forgive, to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. They would always be connected through Lily, bound by the fierce love they shared for their daughter. And perhaps that was enough. Not the passionate romance they'd once shared, but a deeper connection forged through difficulty and growth, through accountability and forgiveness, through the daily choice to be better than they had been before. As Lily ran back to Dominic, holding up her dandelion like a precious treasure, Vivian felt a sense of peace settle over her. Their story hadn't ended the way she'd once imagined, but perhaps it had ended exactly as it needed to, not with a dramatic reunion, but with two people finding their way to a healthier, more authentic connection than they'd ever managed before. And in that moment, watching the father of her child kneel to accept a dandelion from their daughter's tiny hands with all the reverence of receiving a priceless gift, Vivian knew that sometimes the most beautiful endings aren't returns to what was lost, but discoveries of something entirely new. Something that could only be found through the courage to leave, the strength to heal, and the wisdom to recognize that love, in its truest form, sets both people free. "Coffee?" she called through the window, surprising herself with the invitation. Dominic looked up, equally surprised. "I'd like that," he said simply. As they sat at her kitchen table while Lily played with her blocks on the floor nearby, Vivian found herself contemplating the long, winding path that had brought them to this moment of quiet companionship. "I've been offered a partnership at the firm," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Dominic's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Vivian, that's wonderful. You've earned it. It means longer hours, more responsibility," she continued. "I might need some flexibility with our arrangement." "Whatever you need," he said immediately. "I can take Lily more days if that helps. My schedule is flexible now that Eliza's running the day-to-day operations." There was no hint of the old Dominic in his response, no calculation, no attempt to leverage her need into greater control, just a straightforward offer of support. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. "It would help to have her with you on Wednesdays as well. At least until I adjust to the new role. Consider it done." He sipped his coffee, watching Lily over the rim of his cup. "You know, I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For having the courage to leave." His eyes met hers, sincere and clear. "If you hadn't, I would never have faced myself, never changed. I'd still be that man. Controlling, insecure, slowly destroying everyone who tried to love me." Vivian was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. "It wasn't courage exactly," she finally said. "It was survival. I couldn't breathe anymore." "I know." Regret shadowed his features. "And I'm so sorry for that. For all of it." "I've forgiven you, Dominic," she said quietly, realizing as she spoke that it was true. "Not for your sake but for mine." Carrying that anger was exhausting. He nodded, understanding. "Thank you. Though I don't expect it to erase what happened." "It doesn't," she agreed. "But it allows us to move forward, to be the parents Lily deserves." They fell silent again, watching their daughter as she meticulously stacked blocks, her little face a study in concentration. There was something peaceful about the moment. No tension, no unspoken agendas, just two people who had once hurt each other deeply now finding a way to exist in the same space with respect and care. "I've been thinking about the future," Dominic said after a while. "About what I want my life to look like beyond being Lily's father and chairman of the company." "And what have you concluded?" Vivian asked, genuinely curious. "That I want to use what I've learned, about myself, about power, about control, to help others." He looked slightly self-conscious. "I've been working with a nonprofit that helps men recognize and address abusive patterns in their relationships. Sharing my story, mentoring those who want to change." Vivian was surprised but impressed. "That's meaningful work." "It feels right," he said simply. "Using my experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes, from causing the same pain." This was perhaps the most profound evidence of his transformation, not just changing for his own benefit or even for Lily's, but extending that change outward, trying to break cycles of control and abuse in others. "I'm proud of you," Vivian said, the words coming naturally despite their complicated history. "That takes courage." "I had a good example," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with quiet appreciation. As the afternoon progressed, they moved to the backyard, sitting on the patio while Lily explored her outdoor toys. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on Lily's development, their respective work, mutual acquaintances, and plans for the summer. There was a comfort between them that Vivian hadn't expected to find again. Not the intense connection of their early relationship, but something more grounded, more authentic. They had seen the worst of each other and had chosen to grow rather than remain trapped in destructive patterns. When it was time for Dominic to leave, he helped clean up Lily's toys and gathered her things with practiced efficiency. At the door, he paused, something unspoken in his expression. "Would you and Lily like to join me for dinner next weekend?" he asked. "At my place? I've been taking cooking classes, and I'd like to try out a new recipe." The invitation hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. It wasn't just dinner. It was a step toward something beyond their carefully structured co-parenting arrangement. Not necessarily romance, but perhaps a new kind of friendship, one built on the solid foundation of who they had become rather than who they had been. Vivian considered for a moment, searching her feelings. There was no fear there, no anxiety about hidden agendas or manipulation. Just a quiet curiosity about this man who had once been the center of her world, who had then become her greatest fear, and who now stood before her as someone entirely new. "I'd like that," she said finally. "We both would." The smile that lit his face was genuine, touched with surprise and gratitude. "Saturday at 6? "Saturday at 6, she confirmed. After he and Lily left, their daughter chattering happily about spending the night at Daddy's house, Vivian found herself standing at the window again, watching them walk to his car. There was an ease between father and daughter that warmed her heart, a natural bond that had grown steadily over the past year. Her phone chimed with a text from her friend Rachel. "Still on for brunch tomorrow?" "Absolutely," Vivian replied. "I have news about the partnership. Can't wait to hear. And how are things with the co-parenting situation?" Vivian paused, considering how to answer. "Evolving," she finally typed. "In ways I never expected." "Good evolving or complicated evolving?" came the immediate response. "Both, I think," Vivian admitted. "We've been invited to dinner at his place next weekend." Three dots appeared as Rachel composed her reply. Then, "Are you ready for that?" It was the question Vivian had been asking herself since accepting the invitation. Was she ready to explore whatever this new dynamic with Dominic might become? Was she opening herself to potential hurt again? Or was she simply acknowledging the reality that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, that new beginnings sometimes emerged from painful endings? "I think I am," she replied honestly. "Not for what was, but for what might be. Something healthier, something real." "I support whatever makes you happy," Rachel wrote back. "Just remember how far you've come. Don't settle for less than you deserve." "Never again," Vivian promised, both to Rachel and to herself. That night, after finishing some work for her upcoming partnership role, Vivian found herself looking through old photos on her phone. She had deleted most images from her time with Dominic after leaving him, but a few remained, moments that had seemed perfect at the time, before she recognized the subtle control beneath the surface. There they were at the charity gala where they'd first met, Vivian radiant in a blue gown, Dominic handsome and commanding in his tuxedo. On a yacht in the Mediterranean during a vacation that had seemed magical until he'd criticized her for speaking too openly with another guest. At their engagement party, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as he kept a possessive arm around her waist. She swiped further and found more recent photos. Lily's first birthday, with Dominic helping her blow out the candle. A day at the Lincoln Park Zoo, Dominic carrying Lily on his shoulders, his expression one of pure joy. Christmas morning at Vivian's apartment, where he'd been invited to watch Lily open presents. Sitting on the floor surrounded by wrapping paper, all pretense of sophistication abandoned. The contrast was striking. In the earlier photos, despite the glamour and apparent perfection, there had been a tension, a performance quality to their happiness. In the recent images, despite the more modest settings and circumstances, there was an authenticity, a genuine connection that no amount of wealth or status could fabricate. Vivian set her phone aside, a sense of clarity washing over her. She wasn't considering reconnecting with Dominic because she missed what they'd had or because she was romanticizing the past. She was open to exploring this new dynamic precisely because he wasn't the same man, and she wasn't the same woman. They had both been broken by their experience, him by losing her by his betrayal of trust, and had rebuilt themselves into people capable of healthier connections. Whatever happened next, whether they remained simply co-parents or developed a deeper friendship or even, someday, something more, it would be a choice made from strength rather than need, from clarity rather than illusion. The dinner at Dominic's house the following Saturday was surprisingly comfortable. His new home, warm and unpretentious, reflected his changed priorities. The meal he prepared was simple but delicious, nothing showy, just good food made with care. Most telling was how he had prepared for Lily, with a toddler-friendly version of their dinner and special plates that delighted her. As they sat in his backyard after dinner, watching Lily chase fireflies in the early summer twilight, Dominic turned to Vivian with an expression of quiet contentment. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, "for giving me the chance to show you who I'm trying to become. Thank you for becoming someone worth knowing again," she replied honestly. He nodded, accepting both the compliment and its implicit criticism of who he'd been before. "I know we can never go back to what we were," he said carefully. "And truthfully, I wouldn't want to. That relationship wasn't healthy for either of us." "No, it wasn't," she agreed. "But I wonder." He hesitated, choosing his words with evident care. "I wonder if we might find our way to something new, something better. Not right away, and only if it's what you want to." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the man she'd once loved and the man he'd become. The arrogance had been replaced by humility, the need to control by a willingness to support, the insecurity by a hard-won self-awareness. "I'm open to that possibility," she said softly. "One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations." Relief and hope mingled in his smile. "One day at a time," he agreed, "following your lead." As Lily ran back to them, a captured firefly glowing gently between her cupped hands, Vivian felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd fled Dominic's penthouse in the rain 2 years ago, carrying nothing but her purse and the secret of their unborn child. It wasn't the happily ever after of fairy tales, where past hurts are magically erased by grand gestures and passionate declarations. It was something more complex, more authentic, more hard-won. Two imperfect people who had hurt each other deeply, finding their way toward healing, not just for their daughter's sake, but for their own. Two people who had seen the worst in each other and had chosen to become better rather than bitter. Two people discovering that sometimes, the most profound connections aren't found in perfect beginnings, but in the courage to face painful truths and the commitment to genuine transformation. As they helped Lily release her firefly back into the gathering darkness, their hands briefly touched, a simple, human connection without demand or expectation. And in that touch was the promise of possibility, of a future not defined by their past mistakes but by who they were choosing to become, day by day, choice by choice. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, a real one. In the months that followed, Vivian and Dominic continued their careful dance of co-parenting and rediscovery. There were missteps along the way, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, when trust wavered, when the weight of their history felt too heavy to bear. But each time, they found their way back to the path they were forging together, guided by their shared commitment to Lily's well-being and their own growth. By Lily's second birthday, they had established a rhythm that worked for all of them. Dominic had proven himself not just with words but with consistent actions, respecting boundaries, supporting Vivian's career without trying to control it, and being the kind of father who celebrated his daughter's independence rather than seeking to shape her in his image. The partnership they built wasn't what either of them had imagined when they'd first met at that charity gala years ago. It was messier, more complex, more honest than the fairy tale romance they'd once believed in. There were no grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations, just the quiet heroism of two people doing the hard work of becoming better versions of themselves. On a warm summer evening, as they watched Lily chase butterflies in the community garden they'd helped create, a project that combined Vivian's architectural vision with Dominic's resources. Without either dominating the other, Vivian found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked. "What would have happened if I hadn't left that night?" Dominic considered the question carefully, his gaze following their daughter's delighted exploration. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "and I'm grateful every day that you had the courage to go." "Grateful?" She looked at him, surprised. "If you had stayed," he said quietly, "I would never have faced myself, never changed. I would have continued believing that control was love, that power was strength." He turned to meet her eyes. "And Lily would have grown up watching me diminish her mother, learning that was what relationships should be." Vivian nodded, understanding. "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying and fighting. Sometimes it's knowing when to walk away. And sometimes," he added, "it's finding the courage to try again, differently, when you've been given a second chance you didn't deserve." As Lily ran back to them, a wildflower clutched in her small hand, Vivian accepted the offering with genuine delight. This was the life she had built. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentic and hard one. A life where she stood in her full power, where her daughter witnessed healthy boundaries and mutual respect, where even past wounds could become the foundation for something stronger. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what resonated most with you. And remember, my queens, our worth isn't measured by the luxuries surrounding us or the status of our relationships, but by the strength we find when everything is stripped away. Sometimes the greatest love story isn't about who we end up with, but about finding our way back to ourselves and teaching our children to do the same.